Tonight we've got a collection of bedtime stories for gamer kids who are ready to set down their controllers and drift into peaceful dreams. Let's get cozy and drift off together. Before we do, could you please tap subscribe? By doing this small thing, you'll let YouTube know you love what we do. Let's get ourselves cozy, snuggle down, and I'll begin. It's The Sleepy Arcade Alien by Susanna McLaughlin. Stanley the alien sat on the stone wall at the bus stop, watching the white puffy clouds drifting overhead. He looked for the familiar glint of the space bus on its way to pick him up. But as of yet, all that crossed the vast blue expanse of the sky was a little propeller plane, a human one, that did a little loop-de-loop before carrying on its journey. An older alien, a lady with bubblegum pink hair piled up in a neat twist on top of her head, was also waiting, knitting a scarf in rainbow colours. She smiled as she tip-tapped her knitting needles together. Though to a human the bus stop would seem just like any other, it was actually the only bus stop on Earth visited by the intergalactic space fleet. And so it acted as the drop-off and pick-up point for any aliens wanting to take a holiday in our world. Stanley had just spent 7 days on planet Earth, a short holiday, a cultural trip in which he learned all he could about Earthlings. For 7 days, he'd moved amongst them, the older ones, the young ones, the furry ones with 4 legs and a tail. He studied them and their habits, throwing frisbees at the park, splashing in the sea, eating all kinds of human foods. It had been a delightful holiday, but now it was time to return home to his mum and dad, who'd clean his washing and make his dinner. Lovely, sweet home. The bus was late, but Stanley didn't mind. It was so relaxing sitting here on the wall, listening to the tapping knitting, watching the poofy clouds. Stanley took out his headphones and popped an earbud in each ear. He had just found out about something the Earthlings called K-pop, and now he was obsessed. It was all he could listen to. Now, when his favourite song came on, he started to mime the choreography, using his fingers to act out the kicks and spins. He closed his eyes in concentration, nodding along to the beat, only opening his eyes 3 minutes later when he mimed hitting the final pose, making love hearts with his fingers and thumbs. Instead of a stadium of adoring fans, he saw a long yellow spaceship, his ride. It was already being enveloped in pink fog as it rumbled to life, ready to float up into the air. He caught a glimpse of the old lady alien through the window, who was settling into her seat and retrieving her knitting, as the ship disappeared into the clouds above. Stanley started towards the space bus, waving his arms, but it was too late. He missed it. He missed his bus. It had come and gone. Stanley pulled out his earbuds and put his hands on his hips with a sigh. He was such a silly alien. Like his dad always said, he had one foot in this world and the other in his imagination. He would lose his antennae if they weren't screwed on. Stanley looked at the bus timetable and sighed again. The buses came once every hour, but that was an hour measured by Excelcon 6, his home planet standards. And with the time distortion and all, that meant there wouldn't be another bus in 4 Earth weeks, and his parents wouldn't even realize he was late. Silly time dilation, Stanley said, shaking his head. His mum had told him to bring a transmitter so he could call her for a ride in case something like this happened. But Stanley had told her he didn't need to, Transmitters were bulky and loud. He'd just used an Earth phone whilst he'd been here. Earth phones had games like Angry Birds. They were way better. He sighed, shrugged, and sat on the wall. He supposed that in this sticky situation, all there was to do was wait. So he did. He tried all sorts to make the time go quicker. First, he counted the clouds floating overhead. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he watched some ants transporting a piece of lettuce along the pavement, a big marching line, all working together. He counted the ants. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then when he ran out of things to count, he just sat. Stanley stayed there on the wall, swinging his feet and twiddling his thumbs for an hour or so, before realizing waiting was no fun at all. So he began to walk. He strolled through the park and across the tennis courts to the leisure centre, before passing the cinema and crossing Main Street. He wandered along the seafront, watching the seagulls swooping and drifting across the sky. He wandered past groups of kids eating ice cream and salty chips, and the man leading his donkeys back and forth over the sand, giving rides to toddlers. He passed the man who sold donuts, sniffing in the sweet smell, and held his breath as he passed the woman who sold fish sticks and crab shells. Stanley wasn't supposed to still be here on Earth, but on a beautiful day like this, with the donkeys and the gulls and the donuts, surrounded by all these beautiful things, Stanley felt glad that he was. The sun was just beginning to set when he reached the pier, which meant the signs had just lit up for the evening, shining like beacons and reflecting in the water that lapped the shoreline. There, between the chip shop and the candy store, was an arcade, and decorating its front was a giant neon spaceship. The sign was boinging on a spring, as if taking off from the side of the building into the night sky. Stanley gazed up at it and felt a strange kind of homely feeling. The spaceship on the sign was blue, like his mum's. Stanley looked at the other signs affixed onto the building. There was a neon alien raising its hands, fingers split in an extraterrestrial greeting. There were day-glow planets and stars, and upbeat electronic music was spilling out into the night from an open door. The words above the door read, "Intergalactic Arcade." Stanley smiled. This place reminded him of XLCon 6. It felt like home. Stanley shrugged, and the little worries that had set in at the bus stop rolled off his shoulders. So what if he had an extra 4 weeks to spend on Earth? He loved Earth. And maybe, if he stayed here at the Intergalactic Arcade, he wouldn't even miss his home-cooked dinners or clean laundry. Yes, he thought, this would do nicely. The little alien entered the arcade and found himself immediately wrapped in a whirl of sound and colour. Kids were riding pretend motorbikes in front of gaming screens, riding around racetracks. They were putting pennies into machines, trying to knock prizes into their waiting hands. They were making Pac-Man gobble white little dots and chase the little octopi away, and pushing buttons to make a little frog jump to cross a busy road. Stanley, in his own little bubble, watched from the sidelines, comforted by the smiles and laughter filling the room. A tasty smell wafted from the restaurant in the corner of the arcade, and Stanley followed his nose, taking a seat in one of the red leather booths. The mustachioed guy working there, in his cap and Star Wars t-shirt, soon came over and dropped a paper plate in front of him. "Aliens eat free," he said with a wink. Stanley grinned. It wasn't often people saw him. He only reached their knees after all, and people don't tend to notice things they don't believe in. But from the theme of the establishment, he could tell this guy was a fan. On the plate was a thick, doughy slice of pepperoni pizza. Stanley gobbled it down and then accepted another slice, and then a third. When the crowds left, the mustachioed worker swept, mopped, and closed down the arcade, switching off the video games and lowering the lights. "Stay here as long as you want, little dude," he called over his shoulder as he left. And so, Stanley had the intergalactic arcade all to himself. Stanley strolled across the slightly sticky carpets, playing a game here and there. He started with a sports game, throwing basketballs through a net, quickly setting a new high score. They played a lot of basketball on XLCon 6. Their national team, the Mighty Comets of XLCon, had just beat the Jupiter Dribblers to win the Milky Way Cup after all. Then Stanley played a puzzle game, stacking blocks of peculiar shapes and sizes as they fell from the top of the screen. Next, he raced a race car along a rainbow road, picking up mushrooms that gave him ultra speed and dropping banana skins behind him. He got 6th place first, then 5th, then 4th, and 3rd twice. Finally, he came first, and he did a happy dance to celebrate. He collected the little paper tickets he'd won and decided that tomorrow he'd trade them in for a prize, maybe one of those pens with the fluffy troll on top. Finally, Stanley yawned. It had been a surprising day, and suddenly, he realized, he was pooped. His eyelids felt heavy, and his eyes were tired from concentrating so hard on his games. It was time to find a bed. But where? Stanley wandered about for a while, wondering which would be comfier, the restaurant booths or the sticky carpet, until his gaze finally fell on a machine lit up with golden light in the corner. The claw machine. It was full of plushies, big brown teddy bears with button eyes and soft felt noses. They were like a huge cuddle puddle of fluff, all soft bellies and round ears. That would do, Stanley thought. That would do nicely. Stanley headed over to the machine and crawled up through the chute that usually dropped out the prizes. He emerged into the machine and crawled onto the top of the teddy pile. It was as soft as can be. A yawn escaped his mouth as he stretched his arms over his head and sunk into the soft pile of bears. And just like that, he fell into a deep, comfy sleep. Stanley woke up the next morning with his arms wrapped tight around a bear's belly. He felt weightless, supported by a cloud of plushies, and he decided to just lay there a while, just stretching, yawning, and listening to the sounds of the sleepy arcade. Soon, the mustachioed worker was back, opening the shutters to let golden sunshine in, cleaning and mopping, shuffling around in the morning quiet. Stanley stood up, teetered and tottered over to the prize chute, and with a hop slid on his bottom out of the machine, landing perfectly on the carpet. In his hand, he held the rolled-up tickets he'd won during his late-night gaming. Stanley waited patiently until Moustache Man opened up the prize booth, then placed his tickets on the desk with a grin. "Whoa, well done, little dude," the man said. "You're a top gamer." He counted the tickets and gestured to the lowest prize tier. "You've got enough for a troll pen or a skipping rope or a bouncy ball?" Stanley began to peruse the shelf before his eyes started to wander up to the items that had heftier ticket prizes. If you won 250 tickets, you could get a chess set or a skateboard. 500 got a mini trampoline or a life-sized giraffe toy. 750 got you a robot dog or a voucher to feed the elephants at the zoo. Finally, 1,000 tickets got you. Stanley's mouth fell open. A state-of-the-art Martian transmitter with 5 channels and 2 extendable antennae. A transmitter that Stanley could use to call his mum and get a lift straight home. Home, where there'd be a warm dinner on the table and his pet snail and other aliens to shoot hoops with. "Hey, buddy, have you chosen?" the man said. Stanley closed his mouth and grabbed his tickets off the desk. "Changed my mind," he said. "I'm going for gold." He pointed a green finger at the top prize, and the Moustache Man raised his eyebrows, impressed by his determination. "No one's got 1,000 tickets before," he said. "But if anyone can do it, my bet's on you." Stanley headed into the arcade, which was slowly filling up with kids. He needed 1,000 tickets. It couldn't be that hard, could it? He started out on air hockey, and soon a line of kids was trailing around the arcade. No one could beat him. Stanley's reactions were record fast. As soon as the puck bounced off his opponent's pusher, Stanley was there, in the perfect spot waiting for it. And every hit that he made sent the puck bouncing ping, ping, ping around the table until it slotted into the goal with a satisfying clunk. A lazy ribbon of tickets grew from Stanley's side of the table, curling into a pile on the floor. After he won against the last girl in the line, with a whoop and a victory dance, Stanley sat cross-legged and counted his tickets. After 8 hours, he had won 75 tickets. His grand total was now 100. Stanley was puzzled. All that work, all those wins, and he was only 1/10 on the way to his goal. It'd take 10 days for him to win the transmitter. Stanley sat in his booth, eating pizza, resting to get his energy up. The little alien looked around the arcade. Maybe there was a better way to win tickets, he thought. He wandered around the games, running through the maths in his head. How long each game took, how likely he was to win, how many tickets he could get per win. Nothing seemed to help his mission. There was one shadowy corner in the back of the arcade that Stanley was yet to explore. It looked pretty empty and unused. Maybe it held old broken games, or the ones no one cared to play anymore. He padded over, blinking through the darkness as his eyes adjusted. The bright, showy lights didn't reach back here. There, as if it had been left for 100 years, Stanley found a machine covered in a sheet. He pulled back the sheet, sneezing as dust flew into the air like a cloud of glitter. It was a game. Stanley was sure of it. There was a platform to stand on and big speakers, a screen, and buttons to press. There was a big pink button right in the middle. It was emblazoned with the word Start. Thinking he had nothing to lose, Stanley stood on the platform and hit the button. A whir sounded overhead, and a disco ball began to spin with a gentle creak. A series of beeps and boops sounded as the machine began to come slowly to life. One spotlight lit up, then another, and suddenly Stanley was in a show. A shimmering disco of multicolored light began to swim around him, and music began to pump out of the speakers as a dancer appeared on the screen. Stanley stared at a melody he knew well. It was K-pop. But not just that. It was his absolute favourite K-pop song. His favourite any song in the whole world. The floor lit up beneath him, and the dancer on the screen began to dance. Stanley quickly understood the rules. It was a dance game. He copied the screen, stamping in time, anticipating every move, every twirl, sashay and shimmy. Messages began to pop up on the screen. They said, "Amazing! You got it! Style! Swag! On point!" He didn't miss a single move. Stanley was winning the game. In fact, he thought, this game was made for him. He was a K-pop idol. He was a star. His fans were cheering for him, and his antennae were bouncing, his feet moving faster than the speed of light. When the song came to an end, the machine released a long string of tickets. 100 tickets. That's how well Stanley danced. Stanley scrolled through the list of songs. What would he do next? More K-pop, of course. He danced through every song in the repertoire, never missing a point. A crowd soon gathered to watch, drawn into the gloomy corner which was now a disco, their faces bathed in flashing lights as they watched Stanley spin, twirl, and leap across the dance pad in a green, groovy blur. Word spread fast, and passers-by were bundled in off the street, the whole town coming together in the intergalactic arcade. Not only were people seeing an alien for the first time, they were seeing an alien who could dance. Stanley, who usually blended in, was gathering more attention than he ever had before, and he kind of liked it. Someone pulled out a phone and snapped a pic. Then someone else did the same. Stanley didn't notice. He was too busy nailing a jump split. But before long, the intergalactic arcade was all over the internet, and Stanley was being heralded the #Alien Dance King. Each perfect performance caused another ribbon of tickets to drop into his waiting arms. 200, 400, 600. After what felt like hours, he finally hopped off the machine to hugs and applause. He smiled for selfies, making little hearts with his fingers and thumbs, his signature pose. Someone took his place on the dance mat, bopping away, and the crowds turned to cheer on the new star. When his legs no longer felt like jelly, Stanley stood up, dusted himself off, and marched up to the prize counter, a mountain of tickets piled high in his arms. "Hey, champ," Moustache Man said. "That was quite a show. Looks to me like you might have enough for the top prize." Stanley nodded, eyes bright. 1053, he announced proudly, dropping the bundle with a satisfying rustle. Mustache Man reached up to the top shelf and retrieved the Martian transmitter. He rooted around for some AA batteries, popped them in the device, and placed it ceremonially in Stanley's hands. Stanley took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. He felt a warm, fuzzy feeling spread through his chest. He'd done it. He'd won the ultimate prize. Stanley twisted the dial, flipped the antenna, and pressed the biggest button. A soft whir filled the air, followed by a voice crackling through the speaker. "Stanley? Sweetie, is that you?" Stanley beamed. "Hi, Mum. I missed the bus." "Oh, of course you did," she sighed. "Not to worry, buddy. Do you need a lift?" Stanley looked around the arcade. The kids were still dancing, and a girl with big bouncy curls turned to look his way, beckoning him back into the game. He looked at the transmitter. "I think I'll catch the bus home actually when it comes," he said. "I made some friends. I think I want to stay just a little longer, if that's okay." It was, and when he and his mum had hung up the call, Stanley turned back to the arcade, tucking the transmitter into his hoodie pocket and giving it a loving pat as he headed into the throng of laughing kids. That night, Stanley curled up in the claw machine, nestled amongst his pile of teddy bears. Soft, sleepy lights flashed gently overhead. The arcade once again packed down and wiped clean for the night. Now it was quiet, but Stanley still had a happy butterfly or two flapping in his tummy. As he took deep, sleepy breaths, the butterflies ceased their dancing, and Stanley sunk lower into the soft surface beneath him. His belly was full of pizza, and his arms and legs were pleasantly tired from a day of dancing. Stanley, once again, was pooped, and very, very happy. The little alien smiled to himself as he drifted into his dreams. Maybe, he thought, maybe he'd try to miss the bus more often. The once noisy dance machine was now all turned off, polished clean, and sleeping until tomorrow. Stanley had left the disco ball turning, however, sending soft silver light swimming over the walls and floor of the arcade. You would almost have thought you were underwater, with the gentle, undulating patterns shining over the arcade. Stanley dreamt of slowly twisting nebula as the silver light danced against his closed eyelids, and he sank deeper into the soft plush surface beneath him. Glow-in-the-dark stars shone from the ceiling with soft green light, and the soft whir of the aircon filled his alien ears with a quiet, sleepy buzz. Everything was packed away, switched off, and sleeping. And so was Stanley, curled around a soft, plump teddy bear, little tummy moving up and down as he snored. There would be plenty of fun to come tomorrow, but for now, sleep. is The Mountain Race by Luke Prendergast. One afternoon, when the sky was grey and the rain was falling in a pitter-pattering drumroll on the street outside, Maggie and her friend Thomas were sitting on the sofa playing on a video game. The game they were playing was a racing game called Carcraft. In it, you mined and foraged for resources to build your own personalised cars with all of the gadgets and colours and accessories you could want. And then you raced them. Carcraft was Thomas's favourite game. Maggie liked it well enough too, but not as much as she liked other things like doing magic tricks, exploring the great outdoors, and going on wonder-filled adventures in her Imaginarium. But Thomas was fascinated by all things technological, computers and cars and, yes, video games. And Maggie had to admit that when it was rainy outdoors and there wasn't much else they could do, a game of Carcraft with Thomas was pretty fun. And she was getting better at it too. When Thomas had first shown her the game, he won every single race. But now Maggie could keep up with him. That afternoon alone, she had even beaten him twice. Whenever she won, her best pal and magician's assistant, the White Rabbit Marshmallow, who crouched on the floor quite contentedly nibbling on a leaf of cabbage, would thump his foot on the floor in applause, and Thomas would say, "Nice one, Maggie." They were in the middle of one race in which they were speeding down a road that ran alongside a sandy beach and an ocean of curling blue waves, when Maggie had an idea so surprising that she completely forgot she was playing the game, and her racing car drifted right off the road and came to a halt in a cloud of sand. "Everything okay, Maggie?" Thomas asked, pausing the game. "You almost drove straight into the sea." But when he turned to look at her, he recognised the look on her face very well indeed. "Yikes," he said. "You've had an idea, haven't you?" Maggie nodded. "I sure have," she said. And then she proceeded to tell Thomas that the idea had just popped into her head that instead of playing Carcraft on the games console, they could find a way, what with Thomas's technical wizardry, of creating the world of Carcraft in Maggie's Imaginarium and getting to play it for real. Or, she finished breathlessly, not for real, but like real in our imaginations. Maggie's Imaginarium was a tent that she'd set up in her back garden. But it was no ordinary tent. It was an enchanted tent which could take you on wondrous adventures through your own mind. If you lay on your back on the floor of the tent, the canvas ceiling transformed into a brilliant and breathtaking projection of your own imagination, which you could ride through just as though you were riding on a magic carpet. Maggie had taken Thomas on a trip through his imagination a number of times, and it was only a couple of months ago that Thomas had made his own contribution to the Imaginarium. Being the science whiz that he was, he had invented a special gizmo that allowed him and Maggie not only to spectate their imagination, but to literally step inside it. And now Maggie was wondering if Thomas's gizmo could let them play Carcraft for real. Thomas was pinching his chin between his thumb and forefinger, which was something he did when he was thinking hard. "Maggie," he said in a quiet voice, "that is a genius idea. I can't believe I didn't think of it myself." Then Thomas leapt up and went to the corner of the room where his computer was sitting on the desk. He turned it on, then began tapping on the keys so that lines and lines of complicated computer code started running across the screen in a bright white font. Maggie, who was looking over his shoulder, couldn't make heads or tails of it. She might be the greatest magician in town, maybe even in the country, but when it came to computers, she didn't even know where to begin. "What are you doing, Thomas?" she asked. He explained that he was just making some adjustments to the software of the gizmo. Maggie's idea was unbelievably cool, but it would take a few fixes and a lot more power to get the gizmo to make it feel like they were really in the game. So Maggie watched as Thomas typed for a few more minutes. Then he clicked a button, and out of his computer popped the gizmo, which he slipped into his pocket. "Let's hope it works," he said. They told Thomas's mum that they were walking to Maggie's house, which was just a street over. "In this rain?" Thomas's mum said, and insisted that they wrap up properly in their anoraks. Then they set off, with Marshmallow keeping dry beneath Maggie's raincoat. When they reached Maggie's house, they called out, "Hello," to her parents, before running out into the back garden, through the falling rain, and into the shelter of the Imaginarium. Inside was that old familiar smell Maggie had come to love. Damp cloth, warm air, the promise of wonder. Thomas attached the newfangled gizmo to the side of the Imaginarium, while Maggie and Marshmallow took up their places on the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling. When he came to join them, Thomas shifted himself until he was comfortable and said, "Okay, Maggie, off we go. Ready when you are." "Oh no," Maggie said with a little chuckle. "It's not going to be my imagination this time. It's got to be yours." Thomas turned his neck to glance at her, blinking nervously. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You're the magician, the one with the big, magical imagination. Only you can hold together a world as big as Carcraft." "Oh no," Maggie said again, smiling gently at him still. "No one knows the world of Carcraft better than you, Thomas. It's your favourite game." "Nope," she insisted. "This time, it's got to be you. You just have to let your mind relax, and then let your imagination fill up with everything you've ever known and experienced about Carcraft. And anything you're not sure of, just make it up. It is your imagination after all. And don't worry," she added, because she could tell from the look in his eyes that he was still a bit nervous. "I'll be right here next to you all along. I'll guide you through it." "Okay," Thomas sighed. "I'll do my best." "Oh, one more thing," Maggie said. "Try to make it sunny. I'm bored with all this rain." And so, with a deep breath, Thomas did as she said. He closed his eyes, he relaxed his mind, and then he let his imagination fill up with the world of Carcraft. He tried his best not to force it. He didn't grope through his memories of the game, grabbing them and snatching them and stuffing them into his imagination, the way he often stuffed his school books into his overfilled bag. He just let his imagination, as if by its own accord, fill up with the world of Carcraft. "That's it, Thomas," Maggie's voice said from somewhere beside him, and he knew it was working. "Okay," she said. "Here we go." The black ceiling of the Imaginarium lit up with bright stars. Then the stars rained down upon them, or maybe they rained up towards them. They were twisting and floating, body and soul, through the expanses of Thomas's imagination, until, at last, they landed with a gentle thump by the side of a road. It was a road that Maggie recognized. It looked just like the road beside the car workshop in Carcraft. Yes, there was the workshop itself, a big building of corrugated iron with a big sign painted in orange letters outside it. And there were the palm trees, blowing in gentle breeze, the bright sunlight shining through their leaves. The road snaked off into the distance, where a tall mountain loomed out of the landscape. And here, striding out of the workshop, was the car mechanic, Vulcan, a green-haired grizzly bear in work overalls. It was just like in the video game. Thomas really had created the world of Carcraft. "Howdy," said Vulcan, holding out a paw to help them to their feet. You folks ready to build yourselves some cars?" Maggie and Thomas exchanged looks of excitement. "We sure are," they said. "And you guys know what you're doing? First off, you need to head out to collect raw materials. Then you bring 'em back here to the warehouse, and I'll help you knock 'em together to build your very own road racer. Then you race to the top of that mountain." Maggie and Thomas didn't need telling twice. They went out into the forest behind them, searching for resources. Maggie spotted some first, some scrap metal that would be perfect for building the body of her car. She reached for it, and as she touched it, just like it did in the video game, the metal disappeared and tucked itself invisibly into her bag. She couldn't see it, and it didn't weigh a thing, but she knew she had it there in her inventory. "That's so neat, Thomas," she said. Next up, Thomas found some cans of paint, which he put in his inventory. Then he climbed a tree to get some wicked-looking wings that had got stuck in a high branch, while Maggie used a shovel to dig underground. There she found a pile of glistening diamonds, which she knew would be brilliant for decorating her car. While they were on their search, they found a couple of power-ups too. Thomas found a pair of wings that would let his car fly for a minute or so, and Maggie found a vial of bright blue liquid with some strange markings on the front. Neither she nor Thomas had ever seen it before in Carcraft. "That means it must be from your imagination," Maggie told him. "But then why don't I know what it is?" Thomas asked, scratching his head in confusion. "The imagination is a mysterious thing," said Maggie wisely. "The imagination can know things and invent things without us even knowing about it." Soon, when they'd collected all their resources, they'd return to the car warehouse to show Vulcan what they'd found. Vulcan picked through it, growling appreciatively every now and then as he turned over their resources, their wheels and metal scraps and odd machine parts. "Good," he said finally. "Nice haul. These will make 2 pretty sharp cars." Vulcan slipped on his clear face mask and gave Maggie and Thomas some protective clothing too. Then they set to work constructing their cars. They sawed and welded metal pieces together. They fixed axles onto wheels. They pumped tires. And they handed Vulcan spanners and hammers, which he used to clunk noisily about with the engines. Carefully, they fitted panels of glass for windscreens and windows. Thomas had made a sleek car, which sat low to the ground so that it could be extra aerodynamic. He painted it bright green with racing stripes, and to the sides he attached his special power-up wings. Maggie's car was bigger, stronger looking, a truck made for tolerating off-road conditions. It had big tires and a cab that was held high off the ground. She painted it yellow and covered it with the diamonds she found. Finally, she asked Vulcan what the vial of bright blue liquid was. "Ho, now, that's a pretty rare power-up," Vulcan told her. "It's called slow-mo potion. If you break the vial and release the liquid, the whole race will go in slow motion. It's a whole new level of experience, fun and relaxing, all at the same time." Maggie stowed the slow-mo potion in her pocket. She'd decide if she wanted to use it later. When their cars were finally crafted, Maggie and Thomas drove them out to the road where they lined them up on the starting line. They felt little bubbles of excitement going through them because this was the first time they'd ever been in the driver's seat. They were far too young to drive in the real world, of course, but it was great fun to experience it in their imaginations. "All right," said Vulcan, raising a black and white checked flag. "Your destination is that mountain peak. On the count of 3. 3, 2. Neither Maggie nor Thomas could help it. They stepped on the accelerator before Vulcan even had a chance to call 1. Off they rolled down the road, Thomas moving sleekly through the air, Maggie chugging along in her monster truck. The air rushed through their hair, and Marshmallow, who sat beside Maggie in her truck, had to flatten his long white ears along his back so they didn't flap about in the wind. The palm trees rolled past them, as did buildings and houses, with creatures looking out of their windows at them as they went. And then they were out of the town, travelling down a dirt track towards the mountain peak, which was getting bigger and bigger by the minute. Maggie's truck fared better on the dirt track. Thomas's car, speedy as it was, bumped along behind her. "Well," Thomas thought, "now's the perfect time to use my power-up." He pressed a button on his dashboard, and the wings attached to the side of his car began to extend. Then they let out one flap and another flap until he felt himself lifting up off the ground. Maybe, he thought as he rose upwards, his car was better suited to the air than the earth. It swooped and plunged, light as a feather, and in a few moments it had sailed right over and in front of Maggie's truck. "Cool moves," cried Maggie, trundling along behind him. When Thomas landed again, he was some distance ahead of Maggie, and now they had reached the foot of the mountain. But Maggie had a secret power-up up her sleeve too. She slipped the vial out of her pocket, and with her teeth she pulled out the cork, releasing the bright blue liquid into the air. That's when the strangest sensation set in. They were still driving, pressing their feet on the accelerators, moving up the track that snaked its way up the side of the mountain, between boulders and big leafy trees. But they were moving. Well, they were moving incredibly slowly. "Maggie!" Thomas called up ahead. His voice stretched out into slow motion. "You used the vial." Maggie laughed, but her laughter came out in long, drawn-out ha-has. Vulcan was right. The experience of driving in slow motion was at once great fun and surprisingly relaxing. The leaves on the trees seemed to ripple in a gentle wind. Each bounce on the road was slow, a lift and fall, as though they were jumping on the moon. When Marshmallow shook his head, Maggie could see each individual hair flap one way and then the other. And very gradually, in slow motion, Maggie was catching up on Thomas. As they climbed the long, curving mountain road, heading slowly, ever so slowly, towards the peak, the distance between them narrowed and narrowed, until finally, when they were nearly at the top, they were driving right next to each other. In slow motion, Thomas turned towards her and waved through the window. She wondered if she looked just as funny as he did, waving in slow motion. And that was how they finished the race, rolling inch by inch, slow as snails, over the finish line at exactly the same time. As they crossed the line, the effects of the blue liquid power-up cleared up, and they found themselves moving at their normal speed again. They tumbled out of their cars, clutching their bellies with laughter. What fun the slow-motion potion was, they agreed. They'd never felt a sensation like it, as though the link between their brains and their bodies had loosened a little bit, and you watched your arms and legs moving ever so slowly, as though they weren't necessarily your own. And the race was a draw, Thomas said. We got to the mountain peak at exactly the same time. I like that, said Maggie. It's nice to end a day of racing on a draw. She sat down on the floor at the peak of the mountain and looked out at the view below. The whole world of Carcraft spread out before them. The little towns, the teeming roads, the trees and valleys, the racetracks. It was, Maggie thought, infinitely more rich and detailed than anything she'd seen on the video game. Thomas took a seat next to her on the ground, with Marshmallow nestled in between them. Maggie asked him how the Carcraft world of the Imaginarium compared to what they played in his living room. Oh, Thomas said, playing it on the screen is one thing, but living it for real? That's another thing. Well, said Maggie, not for real, in our imaginations. Just because it's in our imaginations, Thomas told her with a wise little smile, that doesn't mean it's not real. Maggie gave out a little chuckle. That's exactly the kind of thing she usually told him, she thought. I'd like to stay here for a little while, said Thomas, before we head back out to the Imaginarium. Me too, Maggie said. It's pretty amazing what you've made out of your imagination. And what's more, it's not raining. And so Maggie and Thomas and Marshmallow stayed on top of the mountain peak, above the beautiful, busy world of Carcraft. They watched as cars as small as insects meandered around roads. They watched as the huge grassy plains turned from green to pink to red as the suns sunk down through the sky. When at last they grew tired and began to yawn, they knew it was time to head back home. They'd spent enough time in the Imaginarium. They were ready to get into their PJs, drink a cup of warm cocoa, and climb into their beds. And so, with one last look around the marvelous world of Carcraft, the three friends closed their eyes and went back home. Sneaky Movie Snacks by Luke Prendergast. Deep in the heart of a faraway forest stood a cozy wooden cabin. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas. Well, not the whole family, actually. Coco lived there, yes. He lived there with his parents and his grandparents and his little sister, Kira the panda. But the family went much wider than that. There was their cousin, Kiki the kangaroo, who lived in Sleepy City. And then, of course, there was Uncle Keith. Although not Coco's direct uncle, he called him that as it was simpler than getting out the family trees to figure out how they were actually related. Keith was actually a distant, long-lost cousin or something that Coco and his Aunt Shirley met in Australia. Keith said he was going to visit Sleepy Forest that day, and when he eventually did, he decided to stay. Now he works in the Sleepy Forest cinema. Coco's mum would often take Coco and Kira across Sleepy Forest to the Cineplex, a big, shining, metal-clad building that reminded them of a spaceship. They would go in, up the escalators, and into the plush, red-carpeted lobby, where ticket sellers sat behind their desks and a big screen hung from the ceiling, telling you which films were playing and what time they'd be on. And there, too, would be Uncle Keith. Coco would give him a hug, and Keith and Coco's mum would catch up. And then Coco, Kira and his mum would go through to watch one of the films. What fun it was, going round to Uncle Keith's. Keith was the security guard there. He wore a special uniform, a blue shirt tucked into blue trousers, with a shining leather belt with a brass buckle, a smart blue cap on his head, and a bright gold badge on his chest that said the word security. And he would stand by the red rope that was strung in front of the doors to the cinema screens and carry out his duties, like checking everyone's tickets, making sure they knew which auditorium they needed to be in, and pointing out the way to the toilets. And, of course, his other very important duty, which Coco's mum never tired of reminding him of. "Remember, Coco," she would say, "you're not allowed to take your own snacks into the film. They have to be snacks bought from the cinema itself. That's the Cineplex's policy. So no sneaking anything in. It's your Uncle Keith's job to make sure no snacks get slipped inside. And if he catches you trying, well, then you'll be in trouble." There was only one problem with this policy. The snacks sold at the cinema were, well, to tell you the truth, they were awful. Everything else about the cinema was just brilliant. The seats were comfy, and everyone was very friendly. They had great shows on, and afterwards you could even go and take your photo in the photo automat so that you could remember each and every special visit. But the snacks, they were just bad. There was barely any variety, just a couple of packets of fruit gummies and some popcorn that only came in salted. And who actually liked salted popcorn other than adults? And was kind of dry anyway. It made no sense to Coco why a cinema that didn't let you bring your own snacks also happened to be the place that offered the worst snacks of anywhere he'd ever been in the world. Like, ever. But it just must be another one of those unanswerable mysteries of the universe. Like why the sky is blue, or why it was that his little sister only ever wanted to play with the exact toy that he had just decided to play with himself. Those mysteries would just have to stay mysteries, he guessed. But just because the mystery of the bad snacks remained a mystery, that didn't mean it had to remain a problem. And finding a solution to it was just what Coco and his little sister Kira were attempting to do one sunny afternoon when their mum took them to the Cineplex. You see, today Coco had a bright blue backpack on his back. And that bright blue backpack was full of the most delicious treats. Yup, that's right. This afternoon, Coco and Kira were going to try to sneak them in. But how will we do it? Kira whispered out of the corner of her mouth as they followed their mum into the Cineplex. We can't just walk them through in the backpack. Uncle Keith will check. I haven't worked that bit out yet, Coco whispered back. But he must have whispered it a little bit too loudly as his mum turned around and gave them both an eyebrows-raised look, as if to say, "What's going on with you two?" Coco had to whistle and look up at the clouds, and Kira just twiddled the purple bow in her hair as innocently as she could, until their mum turned around and carried on walking. We'll have to work that bit out, Coco continued, even more quietly this time, once we get inside. They rode the escalator up into the familiar red-carpeted lobby when a voice called out, "Well, looky who it is." "Uncle Keith!" they exclaimed and ran up and hugged him, each of them wrapping one of their arms around his legs. "How are my favourite niece and nephew?" Uncle Keith asked. "We're very good, thank you, Uncle Keith," Coco said, beaming up at him. "Oh, yes," Kira nodded. "And we're ready to keep to cinema policy, to the very letter." Which made Coco shoot her a warning look. Sometimes Kira could be so tactless. For a few minutes, their mum caught up with Uncle Keith, and then she led them over to the counter to buy tickets for the show. The film today was called Turtle Island. It was about two human sisters who go and help look after newborn baby turtles in Thailand. And Coco and Kira had been looking forward to seeing it for ages. "Any snacks with those tickets, folks?" the friendly badger behind the counter asked. Coco and Kira exchanged a secret, sly look, then turned their shining smiles to the badger. "No, thank you," they told him. The badger passed over their tickets, and they thanked him, and then they moved away with their mother. "All right, you two," their mum said. "I'm going to go and run some errands while you two are in your film. Uncle Keith is going to keep an eye on you, and I'll be here waiting with him the moment you step out, okay?" Coco and Kira both nodded. "And remember," their mum called over her shoulder as she went towards the escalator, "behave yourselves." "Yes, Mum," Coco called back sweetly. "We always do." And then they were alone with Uncle Keith. "Hey, Uncle Keith," Coco said. "We're just going to sit over on that table there until the film starts." "All righty," said Uncle Keith, nodding. "That's no problem. Just stay where I can see you and make sure you don't miss the show. It's terrific." Coco and Kira went over to the table, and Kira hopped onto the bench. Coco swung the blue backpack off his back and joined her, placing the bag on the table and opening the zip just a little so that they could peer inside. It was filled with all of their most favourite snacks. Gummy bears and strawberry laces, flying saucers and candy cables, chocolate coins, and even a bag of butterscotch toffee popcorn. Yum! Neither Coco nor Kira could think of anything they'd like more than sitting in front of Turtle Island and munching their way through all their snacks. But how were they supposed to sneak them in? They sat there, scratching their heads, humming and hawing and trading half-baked ideas that would never work. Near them, as they chatted, were a circle of other young creatures, including an elephant and a chipmunk, a mole and a kangaroo, and a small flock of fluffy sheep. But Coco and Kira barely noticed them, so immersed were they in their conversation, until the mole, who sported a pair of green-rimmed glasses over his blinking eyes, sidled over to them. "Psst," the mole whispered. Kira and Coco looked at her with their eyes raised. "No meaning to eavesdrop on the two of you," the mole went on, "but I could help but hearing what you were talking about there. My eyesight might be less than perfect, but I've got ears like a mole, so you two are trying to sneak snacks in?" Coco and Kira exchanged a nervous glance. Oh dear, Coco thought. Had they been busted? "No need to worry, guys," the mole said with a twinkling smile. "We're trying to sneak them in too. Let's be honest, the snacks here ain't all they could be. Want to come and trade ideas? Like they say, the more heads, the merrier." A little flood of relief went through Coco. "Thanks," he said. "That will be great." And so he and Kira went over to meet their new friends, who were all avidly discussing just how to get their treats into the cinema screen. "We have a plan already," bleated one of the sheep. "We will simply hide our fruit pastels in our woolly coats. Look, now you can barely see them." And it was true. All of the many-coloured sweets were hidden deep inside their white woolly coats. "That's all right for you sheep," said the mole. "But what are the rest of us meant to do?" "Yeah," piped up the kangaroo. "I don't have any wool I can hide sweets in." "Neither do I," said the chipmunk. "Nor me," said the elephant. "So," said the mole, "what are we all meant to do?" And the whole circle of them started scratching their heads. They couldn't think of anything. Above them, the slender hand swung around the great clock, slicing off seconds one by one. It wouldn't be long before they had to go into the cinema. Would they think up a plan in time? Then, like a light bulb coming on in her head, Kira had one. "I know," she said. "Even though we don't have woolly fleeces like the sheep, we can still take a leaf out of their book. Each of us is a different creature. We have to think about what unique qualities each of us has. That will help us sneak the treats in." "What a good idea, Kira," said the mole, before all the rest of the creatures started nodding as they contemplated her suggestion. And then, armed with the idea, they put their heads together and thought. Uncle Keith had been working at the cinema for years and years, more years than he could even remember. And though you might think a cinema is a pretty monotonous place to work, he'd beg to differ. Uncle Keith had seen some things in his time. The art of cinema could do the strangest things to creatures. They could come out laughing or crying, shouting or dancing for joy. Birds flew to the ceiling and wouldn't come down. Wildebeests stampeded. And once, a young otter had locked himself in the toilet and refused to come out until his favourite actor, who he had just seen in a film, personally travelled from Hollywood to meet him. But Uncle Keith had to admit he hadn't seen anything stranger than what occurred to him that afternoon Coco and Kira came to see Turtle Island. At first, everything seemed normal enough. His sister came with the kids, dropped them off. Then Coco and Kira went to sit at the table to wait until the film began. And that's when the strange things started to occur. It began with an elephant. The elephant walked towards Keith with a funny look on his face, a kind of embarrassment mixed with trying to look extremely breezy. It was a look Uncle Keith recognized, the look of someone about to misbehave. But much to his surprise, the elephant didn't do anything wrong at all. He just showed Keith his ticket. "Ah, Turtle Island," Keith said. "Enjoy the show." And the elephant walked on through. A little bemused, Keith turned to watch the elephant go in, and that's when he saw something truly peculiar. All over the elephant's back there were snacks taped down with sellotape. Chocolate and candy and even a box of popcorn. Uncle Keith frowned. Why ever would someone do that? It was almost as if the young elephant was trying to hide the snacks from him, but had totally forgotten that Keith was able to see the elephant's back, just as well as he was able to see his front. Keith shook his head. But he didn't have long to think about it, because just a moment later, the next peculiar thing occurred. A little chipmunk with brown and white stripy hair approached him, bearing a ticket. "Howdy," Keith said as he checked it. "Looking forward to the show today?" But the chipmunk didn't answer. Instead, she just gave him a big toothy smile. And when she did, lo and behold, a bright red sweet popped straight out of a gap between her teeth and went skittering across the floor. The chipmunk gave a surprised little squeak, clamped both of her paws against her mouth, and hurried through into the cinema. Very strange, thought Uncle Keith, going to pick up the fallen sweet and put it in the bin. Very strange indeed. He turned around and came face to face with a kangaroo. "Hello," said the kangaroo. "Here's my ticket." Uncle Keith checked it, pointed the way, and only then noticed that the kangaroo's pouch was absolutely filled with coins. Except the coins appeared to be melting. Yes, that's right, melting. They were chocolate coins, and they were so close to the warmth of the kangaroo's belly that they were all beginning to melt and ooze. Now, why would a kangaroo choose to store his heat-sensitive snacks like that? Uncle Keith sighed and shook his head, then looked up at the big clock. The show was just about to start, so everyone ought to be in the auditorium and waiting. But wait, he hadn't seen Coco and Kira go in. He didn't want them to miss the film. Uncle Keith looked over at the table where Coco and Kira had been, only to find that now they weren't there. In fact, they were nowhere to be seen. He had told them to stay in sight, so where on earth could they have gone? What Uncle Keith didn't know was that Coco and Kira were in fact already in the cinema. They were sitting on their soft, comfy seats, the blue backpack full of the most tasty snacks imaginable open in front of them, and the film about to start. Next to them sat their new friend, Mindy the mole. Coco looked at her and grinned. "That was an epic sneak-in," he said. "Oh, yeah," she replied. "It certainly was." You see, once all the other animals had worked out their ways of sneaking snacks into the cinema, only Coco, Kira, and Mindy had been left. Coco and Kira couldn't quite come up with any ideas of how to sneak the snacks in. What kinds of stealth and subterfuge were natural to a panda and a koala, after all? But that's when Mindy had told them that they'd already brought their special talents along. They, after all, had brought the big bag of sweets with them, and had come up with the idea to follow the sheep's lead. So it was up to her, Mindy, to get them in. And so Coco and Kira had watched as Mindy burrowed a hole straight down through the ground. Then she poked her head with her little green spectacles out of the hole and told them to follow her. Well, Mindy had burrowed straight under Uncle Keith and into the cinema screen, and Coco and Kira had followed after her with the backpack full of sweets. And here they were. They'd made it. Except... "Uh-oh," Kira whispered. "It's Uncle Keith." He was climbing up the auditorium stairs, his security guard's torch in his hand, and he was looking right at them and their lapful of sweets. It was too late to hide them. "Here you two are," said Uncle Keith. "How on earth did you manage to get in without me seeing?" Coco felt a little bashful, but he had to own up. He told his uncle how they got in. "But we only did it because we wanted to bring in our own snacks, Uncle Keith. The truth is, the cinema snacks are no good, and you've got to have snacks with a film. You've just got to. And I know it's against the cinema's policy, but..." "What do you mean?" Uncle Keith said, a little frown furrowing his furry forehead. "What cinema policy?" "The policy against bringing your own snacks in, of course," Kira said. Uncle Keith looked from one to the other, then let out a mirthful little chuckle. "Who told you that load of codswallop?" he said. "There's no such policy at all." Coco and Kira stared at him, wide-eyed. "But Mum told us there was," Coco said, "ever since I was tiny." Uncle Keith shook his head, his belly shaking with laughter. "Sounds to me like your mum was just trying to stop you eating all those naughty snacks, and it worked." Now it was Coco and Kira shaking their heads. Their sneaky, devious mum tricking them like that. They couldn't believe it. "So we're allowed to eat these snacks?" Kira asked. "You certainly are," said Uncle Keith. "And, in fact, I'm going to join you. Film's about to start." With these words, Uncle Keith lowered himself down into the chair next to them and stuck his paw into the blue backpack, pulling out a bag of sweets. "Oh," he said, "lemon sherbets, my favourite." And with that, Coco and Kira and their Uncle Keith and their new friends, Mindy the mole and the kangaroo and the chipmunk and the elephant and the flock of bleating sheep too, all hushed up because the film was starting. The words Turtle Island appeared in big green letters on the screen, and then there were images of a perfect tropical island, turquoise waves lapping against golden beaches, and green-backed turtles drifting out across the sea. Coco sunk down further in his seat, and beside him, Kira did too. They had fistfuls of butterscotch popcorn, which they ferried back and forth from their mouths. The screen flickered. The two little sisters appeared in their high-rise flat in Bangkok. That paradise island had just been a dream, all in their heads. But Coco had a feeling that they might end up there in real life eventually. And everyone in the cinema watched the screen. They laughed, they sighed. Perhaps a tear even came to an eye. And if one or two of the audience members fell asleep and ended up snoring gently on their neighbour's shoulder, who could blame them? It was tiring work, sneaking snacks into cinemas. And there are few better places for a nap than when you're watching a film, surrounded all around by your friends and family. Is The Dragon and the Temple of Donuts by Jane Thomas. Perhaps you remember the story of Iggy Flame, the dragon who lives in a beautiful cavern in the mountains of Sleepy Forest. Perhaps you remember his brother and sister, Fira and Agni, and that he lives with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Flame as you should call them, and Grandma and Grandpa Flame, and that Iggy's totally unique, never to be repeated, extra special magical party trick is that he blows bubbles instead of fire. There are many advantages to blowing bubbles rather than fire, and Iggy is slowly discovering some of these. He doesn't accidentally set things on fire for a start, and he doesn't need to rush down towards a river when he gets a coughing or sneezing fit. Bubbles are just beautiful clear balls with rainbows swirling around inside that drift through the sky and wait for someone to leap up and burst them with a satisfying pop. Or that keep on floating forever and ever, heading out to play with the moon and the stars. And there's something that is sometimes good and sometimes bad, depending on the day and the moment. And it is that because Iggy Flame is the only dragon around who blows bubbles, he is very, very, very memorable. It basically means that Iggy has to be on his best behaviour at all times, because there's absolutely no way that he's ever going to get away with anything. And while being on our best behaviour is something that we should probably always try and do, it does feel a little bit, well, I'm sure you know, unexciting. Which is why when Fira and Agni came to Iggy's room one evening and said they'd found a treasure map and did he want to go exploring with them, he immediately said yes. In that moment, Iggy was tired of being the sensible one, the one who pointed out all the possible problems with a plan and why they'd maybe get into trouble, and that staying at home and playing ping pong was probably a much better idea. The treasure map had come from, and perhaps you've guessed it, Here Be Dragons, the shop run by Theobald Alysius Thackeray, and that's opened on days he feels like it. Or if someone comes along and offers him a sizable chunk of cheese in exchange for switching the sign from closed to open. Fira had been talking to Cuddle, who'd been talking to Prickles, and, well, to cut a long story short, they'd ended up with this treasure map that showed the location of a rather wonderful-sounding place. The Temple of Donuts, Iggy read aloud, licking his lips and imagining an entire temple made up of donuts. Dragons have two favourite things to eat. The first is anything hot and spicy that puts a fire in their belly. That one is obvious, I suppose. And the second, that you might never have guessed, is donuts. They love ring donuts, the ones that are sticky with sugar, or have a little cap of icing running around them. And they love tiny donuts that are little puffs of delight. And they love big fat donuts that ooze pools of bright red strawberry jam when you bite into them. If you should ever be lucky enough to meet a dragon, be sure to invite him to join you in a donut. You'll have a friend for life. The plan was set. The three of them would leave the following morning as soon as the sun had crept over the horizon. Of course, this plan would have been perfect, but the sun didn't really get a chance to do any creeping because there were far too many clouds around. So rather than departing on their adventure at the crack of dawn, they set off shortly before lunch and headed out into what can only be called very determined drizzle. "To the park!" they called down to Grandpa Flame as he stepped onto the terrace of the cave and asked where they were going. "In the rain?" he called back, and all three had shrugged their glowing wings and given him a wave and carried on flying. "They're never going to the park," Grandpa Flame mumbled to Grandma Flame, who just smiled and patted the chair beside her, inviting him to sit down. "They'll be just fine," she assured him gently. "The pigeon trackers are in place, remember?" With that reminder, he was able to settle. The pigeon trackers are exactly what you'd imagine they might be. Pigeons that track. Since pigeons are everywhere, have you ever noticed that? They really do get everywhere. They can blend into the background, and nobody ever guesses they could be tracking. So the pigeons can hide in plain sight, as it were, and then use their homing skills to report back to base camp, usually parents and grown-ups, and let everyone know that things are just fine. So off went Iggy, Fira and Agni, blinking their way through the drizzle and fluttering their wings to get the water off every now and then. And also off went 3 pigeon trackers, little pouches of seed carefully stowed so they could be sure to fly just as far and for just as long as the dragons. Agni had learned the treasure map by heart, so off they went, following first one river and then another, turning left as they came to a forest, and then right when they saw a castle with a pointed hatted tower room on each of its 4 corners. In fact, they flew so far that eventually the clouds ran out of rain and finally they were sweeping across a desert that rose and fell in vast sweeps of red and gold sand. In the distance, they could see rocky mountains rising up from the desert, and as they came closer, they saw entrances to caves. There must have been 100 on the first mountain alone, but Agni had taken the time to study the map and knew exactly where they must go. Not this mountain, nor this one, nor this one either. Yes, this one. The shape looking a bit like a giant camel loping its way into the distance. And there, right in the middle of its second hump, was the cave they needed to enter. Perhaps Fira and Iggy wouldn't have been so very certain Agni was right, except at the entrance to the cave was a little painted sign with an arrow that told them it was this way, right this way, to the Temple of Donuts. And honestly, they didn't need the sign either. They could smell the donuts from where they stood. Iggy drooled a stream of bubbles. As the 3 disappeared into the entrance of the cave, the trio of pigeon trackers landed on the sign. They did a quick inspection and established that there was definitely only one way in and one way out of the cave, and that decided it. They sat, pulled out a pack of playing cards, and settled down for as long as it would take. Iggy, although the smallest and youngest of the 3 dragons led the way into the cave. A series of lanterns set into the wall lit the way, and if they ever came across one that wasn't particularly bright, well, it was only a moment before Fira or Agni sorted that problem out. The tunnel widened in some places and narrowed in others, was high one moment, and the next they had to crawl. But the further they went, the more they smelled the doughnuts and knew they had to keep going. Iggy heard the sound of running water, and rounding the next bend, they came across a sparkling stream. You might expect that a stream would be no obstacle to a dragon. After all, they do come with a pair of wings that can take them anywhere. But I suspect you don't know that the first rule of flying that dragons are taught, before they can even walk, is that you must never, ever fly indoors. Far too many things go wrong when you fly indoors. There are things to bump into and things to break, and ceiling fans to get tangled up in, and curtains that can be pulled down, and every good dragon knows that indoor flying is absolutely forbidden. So it never occurred to any of them to fly across the stream, and instead they looked for a way across. It was Iggy who found the solution. He took one of the lanterns from the wall and held it this way and that, shining the light onto the water and looking for a bridge or a stepping stone they could use. And there it was, a bright green stone that almost seemed to glow, that almost seemed as if they could look inside it. Iggy handed the lantern to Fira, and he stepped back into the tunnel a few paces to be able to take a run up. 1 stride, 2 strides, 3 strides, leap! Iggy leapt and pointed his toes and went to land on the glowing bright green stone when, boing, he was launched back up into the air. As he waved his arms and flailed his legs, he shot towards the far side of the stream, landing with a bump and a thump. "It's jelly!" he called back to the others. "The stone isn't a stone at all. It's a giant green jelly." And he was absolutely right, as both Fira and Agni proved by also boinging off the jelly and bouncing their way to join Iggy. "Right," said Iggy, with determination in his voice. "What's next?" He marched along the tunnel and came to a huge cavern, a great pool of liquid yellow bubbling away in front of him. Bending down, Iggy dipped his hand into the yellow and gave it an experimental sniff before licking it. "Custard," he declared. "It's an entire lake of custard." Hanging from the highest heights of the very high ceiling of the cavern were great lengths of red rope, or indeed, as they soon found out, strawberry shoelaces. A series of steps and pulleys were lit by the lanterns, and the 3 little dragons took it in turns to climb the steps, haul in a shoelace, and then launch themselves across the custard lake to land on the far side. Iggy let out a little screech of delight as he was swept through the air, clinging on for all he was worth. His tail clipped the custard and sent a huge wave of yellow trailing behind him, and as he laughed, rainbow shimmer bubbles fell from his mouth and nose. The challenges continued as they went further and further into the mountain, with the dragons using lollipops as paddles in boats that crossed a chocolate river, and the stickiest caramels to help them climb a wall. But finally, they arrived into the biggest cavern of them all, and there were tables piled high with doughnuts. And in the walls were carved little shelves that were filled with doughnuts. And the dragons, who up until then had behaved themselves very well indeed and not eaten a thing beyond that single lick of custard, dived into it all. There were doughnuts so big and springy you could use them as a chair, and doughnuts so tiny you could eat 10 of them in a single go. There were ring doughnuts so large they could slip them around their middles and use them like rubber rings as they floated in a river of syrup that drifted idly around the edges of the room. There were doughnuts dusted with icing sugar, and doughnuts covered in sprinkles, and doughnuts dressed with chocolate drops and gummy bears and jelly beans. Doughnuts were shaped like hearts and diamonds, and in one corner they found doughnuts shaped exactly like dragons. Iggy bit into one of these, and the jam inside was hot with chilies, so hot that for a moment he felt as if he was breathing fire. And if he'd been able to look closely, which he couldn't because his eyes were watering so hard, he might have seen the faintest shimmer of a flame inside the bubbles that he blew after eating those doughnuts. And then Iggy went to pick up a particular doughnut and found it wasn't a doughnut at all, but it was something that was stuck to the wall, and he pressed against it and turned it and fiddled it this way and that, and a door creaked its way open at the side of the cavern. The three of them gasped, looking at steps that were covered in jewels and diamonds that glowed and glinted by the light of the lanterns, and they started climbing the steps, following them round and round, heading deeper and deeper into the very heart of the mountain. At the top of the steps was a table, and on that table was a plate of doughnuts. The three dragons had already eaten more than they had ever thought possible, but something about this plate of doughnuts said these were the special ones. These were the finest that might ever be found. These were the ones they had really come all this way for. They didn't necessarily look anything particularly special. Iggy reckoned that each was about the size of his average, everyday, basic sort of bubble. But they smelled of cinnamon and cherries, and they glistened with even more beauty than the stairs that were covered with diamonds. And before they knew it, the three of them were reaching forwards to take the doughnuts one by one and cram them into their mouths. It was a matter of a single minute, and the whole plate had been cleared, and the dragons were lying down, fluttering their glowing wings, a special kind of wonderful washing over them. As they lay and rested, Iggy spotted an envelope. He reached over and looked at it, reading, "To the finder of the grand doughnuts," on the front. A quick sniff revealed it too smelled of cinnamon and cherries, and he was sure this envelope was linked to the doughnuts they had just eaten. He opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. "Dear Doughnut Eater," he read aloud, snorting a few bubbles from his nose as he held back a giggle. "You have found the finest doughnuts the world has ever known. These are made from the sweetest cherries, grown on a single tree in a land far, far away. They are crafted from the softest cinnamon, grown in a single garden in a land far, far the other way. Bringing them together at the perfect time is no small task. Enjoy these doughnuts if you must. Appreciate every bite, for they are only made but once a year, when the moon is full and the world is ready." How long did we take to eat those doughnuts?" asked Fira. "About a minute," said Agni. Right, said Iggy. So, a year's worth of work, said Agni. In a single minute, finished Fira. There was silence for a while, before Iggy broke it by saying, Whoops! The three of them burst out laughing, 2 flames reaching high into the cave, and 1 stream of bubbles pouring out into the darkness. They learned a very important lesson that day. When something wonderful happens, take the time to enjoy it. And that something wonderful might come in a very unexpected form, like in a plate of donuts that taste oh so very, very delicious. Same time next year? Said Agni at last. You didn't even need to ask, said Iggy. 3 little dragons walked down the twisting turns of the diamond and jewel-covered stairs. 3 little dragons walked back through the door and into the vast cavern that was somehow once more filled with doughnuts. All the ones they'd eaten had been replaced, and all the ones they'd used to float in the syrup river had been dried off and hung up, waiting for the next visitors. The door in the wall closed behind them, and try as he might, Iggy couldn't remember which of the doughnuts he'd pressed to open it. Oh well, he shrugged to himself. He had a year to work it out. 3 little dragons used lollipops to steer boats across the chocolate river, and the stickiest caramels to help them climb down a wall. They swung on strawberry shoelaces across a great lake of yellow custard and bounced from a glowing green jelly in the middle of a stream. One by one, they reached the entrance to the cave, hidden in the second hump of a camel-shaped mountain on the edge of a desert. And one by one, they said good evening to 3 pigeons who were sat playing cards on the ledge. To most of us, one pigeon looks very like another, and none of the 3 little dragons noticed that these were the very same who had followed them from their home high in the mountains of Sleepy Forest. Perhaps if they hadn't been so very tired and so very full of doughnuts, they might have seen that the pigeons packed up their cards and flew off after them. But all they could think about was being tucked up in bed. The desert sand glowed red with the setting sun, and then the clouds shifted back into place, and the dragons flew through the rain back towards the castle with the 4 pointed turrets on its corners, back towards the forest, back towards first one river and then another, and back towards the terrace outside their home. Grandpa Flame was sitting on the terrace, a big umbrella held in one hand and a book in the other, and he looked over the top of his glasses as the 3 little dragons arrived. Good day at the park? He asked, without a hint of a joke in his voice. The best, said Iggy. Wonderful, said Fira. Magic, said Agni. And they headed inside and didn't notice the 3 pigeon trackers report that the dragons had found the Temple of Doughnuts, and Grandpa Flame smiled as he remembered the very first time he'd been there too, and he wondered if his 3 little dragons had been lucky enough to find the grand doughnuts set on the altar at the top of the stairs covered in diamonds and jewels. Iggy, being the smallest and youngest of the dragons, was perhaps the most tired of them all. His feet dragged across the floor as he headed to the sink and carefully brushed his teeth. Up and down, up and down with the brush, and up and down, up and down with his eyelids as he struggled to stay awake. He climbed into his pajamas, the red ones, the really snuggly ones, and settled into his bed, pulling the blankets up around him and being sure to tuck his wings in safe and close. His mother came in all ready to read him a bedtime story, but Iggy could only mumble a very small "good night" before he was fast asleep, and she leaned down to kiss her littlest dragon on the tip of his bubble-blowing nose before she tiptoed quietly out of the room and softly closed the door behind her. It is perhaps unsurprising that Iggy dreamed of the temple as he fell asleep, and he dreamed of swimming in a honey river and floating in a syrup stream, and of swinging through a forest where the vines were made of strawberry laces and the trees were made of chocolate. He dreamed of someone growing cinnamon on one side of the world and of someone else growing a cherry tree on the other. And he dreamed of them travelling to the edge of a desert and a mountain that was the shape of a camel, and everything coming together under a full moon to make the perfect, most delicious donut of them all. And he dreamed of going there the following year, and of flying along the rivers and forests with his grandpa Flame by his side. And in his dream, he took an hour to eat a single bite and a day to finish a donut. The bubbles he blew as he dreamed drifted around the room. Rainbow swirls dancing in the moonbeams that reached through the open window. Bubbles floating outside to head high, high into the world to sparkle and shine with the stars. Is Munchy the Raccoon in Pizzatopia by Alicia Ainsley. It was a beautiful sunny day, and Munchy the Raccoon walked down the street with a skip in his step. Today was a special day for Munchy. Today was his first day at his new job. Munchy had never had a job before, so he didn't know what to expect. All he knew was that he was eager to get started and itching to learn. When Munchy was debating what to do for a job, he thought about what he loved to do. Everybody said that if he found a job he loved, then he would never work a day in his life. And Munchy liked the sound of that. So Munchy thought hard. As he thought, his mind drifted to what he was having for lunch. And so he realised that what he loved was eating. Eating, and more eating. A job that involved food was essential. And when he saw the advertisement for a job at Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia, it couldn't have been more perfect. Munchy the Raccoon loved pizza. It was one of his favourite foods in the whole world. He didn't mind what topping it had, whether it was covered in olives, pineapple or chili peppers. Munchy would gratefully gobble it up without complaint. Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia had been running for a couple of years, and the dynamic duo who owned it had built up a big reputation during that time. Munchy had heard many good things about the pizza at Mia and Marcello's, but he was still yet to try it. He hoped that he would get to do lots of taste testing on the job. Now, With Munchy's first day of work ahead, he giddily skipped all the way to Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia, eager to begin. As Munchy approached the big red sign above the shop door, he could see that Mia and Marcello were already busy taking orders. Munchy stepped through the front door and announced, "Hello, Mio and Marcello. I'm here for my first day of work." Marcello looked up over the shop counter, his beady eyes surveying Munchy with curiosity, and then a glint of realization. The beady-eyed frog called out in an Italian accent, "Oh good, you're here! Mia, the raccoon is here!" Then, from the back of the pizza kitchen, walked out a tall, blue-tinged Italian greyhound, wearing a purple hairnet over her ears. It was Mia, who had interviewed Munchy for the job. Mia walked over and smiled at Munchy. "Welcome, Munchy. It is good to see you," she said warmly. "Are you ready to get started?" Munchy nodded his head eagerly, and Mia led him through into the back of the shop. Mia gave Munchy a tour of the pizza kitchen, which was already kicking into action for the day. There was a large wood-fired oven, already cooking up some pizzas, a long worktop sprinkled with flour with several pizza dough bases already laid out, waiting to be covered in toppings. And on the other side of the counter were buckets full of different ingredients and toppings for the pizzas. Whilst Mia gave Munchy a tour, Marcello the frog answered the phone and took down food orders. They were piling up fast. There wasn't time to guide Munchy through the pizza-making process. He would have to learn as they went along. They had some orders to fulfill. Marcello toddled over to Mia and Munchy with his gangly frog legs and slapped a piece of paper down on the worktop. "Here's your first order, il bambino," Marcello commanded, twizzling his moustache with his fingers. The customer wants a pizza luna with a side of mozzarella sticks." Mia commented with a smile, "Ooh, very cheesy." Marcello responded with a grin, "And very delicious." Marcello and Mia were very different from one another, but they shared the same love for pizza. At first sight, anyone who saw Marcello and Mia together would never guess that they were married. Marcello was an oversized frog with a curly red moustache. He spoke fast and assertively, and often seemed as though he was permanently mad about something. But actually he was perfectly happy. Even though Marcello was big for a frog, he was no way near as tall as his wife, Mia. Mia was a beautiful, statuesque greyhound, with a gentle voice and a gentle heart. Mia always had a smile on her face and was very popular with the customers who came back time and time again to their Pizzatopia. Mia and Marcello might have been polar opposites in many ways, but their differences complemented each other, and they were an unstoppable team. However, since their pizza shop had become so popular, they needed an extra pair of hands to help them fulfill all the orders that came in. And bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Munchy the raccoon seemed like the perfect fit. Munchy only hoped that he was cut out for the job. Marcello waddled back to the front of the shop where the phone was already ringing again, and Mia pinned the piece of paper up on the order board that hung above the pizza-making area. Munchy read the order again and asked, "What is a pizza luna?" Mia rubbed her paws together excitedly and replied, "It is a very special type of cheese pizza. The cheese used on a pizzaluna comes from the moon. Munchy gasped. You mean you use moon cheese on your pizzas? He questioned with intrigue. Mia the greyhound nodded her head and responded, Yes, well, only on a pizzaluna. That's what makes it so special. We use normal earth cheese on all other pizzas. Munchy was impressed. He had heard of moon cheese before, but he'd never tried it. Mia guided Munchy through the process of making a pizza so that he could learn as they went along. To begin, she told him to scoop a ladle full of pizza sauce out of the first bucket and tip it onto the plain, doughy base on the worktop. Then, he had to use the bottom of the ladle to spread out the pizza sauce all over the circular dough, leaving just a little space near the outer edges, clear to act as the crust. Then, they could get to work on the pizza toppings. Making a pizzaluna was pretty simple as far as pizzas go. The only toppings Munchy needed to use were a few chunks of moon cheese from one of the buckets, and then a drizzle of garlic oil from one of the sauce bottles. Munchy picked out 3 slices of moon cheese for the pizza, and Mia told him to take one more for himself. It was important to taste test the food, she told him. He placed 3 slices evenly across the pizza base and popped the 4th slice into his mouth. Instantly, the moon cheese began to melt on his tongue. It tasted delicious. It was like no cheese he had tasted on Earth before. It was otherworldly. Munchy inspected his pizzaluna so far. It seemed like there was a lot more pizza sauce than cheese, but Mia assured Munchy that the cheese would melt in the oven and spread out all over the base to create a perfectly gooey, cheesy pizza. Then, last but not least, Munchy picked up the bottle of garlic oil and tipped it onto the pizza with a big dollop. Oh, stop, stop, Mia cried out softly, grabbing the bottle of garlic oil out of Munchy's hands. You've got to be very careful with the oils. Otherwise, they come out too fast. Watch this. Munchy watched as Mia expertly drizzled a small amount of garlic oil across the whole of the pizza with a flourish of her arm. She turned back to Munchy and saw the mixture of doubt and awe on his face, and she whispered, Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. It takes practice. Now that the pizza was ready for the oven, Mia ordered Munchy to grab one of the wooden pizza boards that were stacked up to the side of the oven. The pizza boards were big and round with long handles, and Munchy struggled to wrap his little hands around one. With all his might, he heaved a pizza board off the pile and brought it over to the pizza worktop, wobbling and catching his balance along the way. The pizza boards were a little too big for him. Mia smiled and said, Now, slide the board underneath the pizza dough, and you're going to carry it over to the oven to cook. Munchy braced himself, took a deep breath, and slowly attempted to slide the thin wooden board underneath the delicate pizza dough. The board wobbled from side to side as he tried to balance the heavy board in his tiny hands, but eventually he managed to scoop up the pizza successfully. Munchy sighed with relief and lifted the pizza up off the worktop before turning to face the oven. This would be the hardest part, trying to carry the pizza across the kitchen without dropping it. Munchy took it step by step and focused on keeping the wooden board straight as he slowly moved across the kitchen. The heavy board swayed from side to side, with the pizza Luna perched on top, and beads of sweat began to trickle down Munchy's furry face. "Don't drop it, don't drop it," he muttered to himself pleadingly. The pizza oven drew closer, and Munchy could see the end in sight. With just a few more steps to go, Munchy felt his little hands and wrists beginning to shake. They were getting very tired from carrying the heavy board. He quickened his footsteps and sped towards the oven, holding the pizza out ahead of him. Just as his tiny hands gave in from the weight, he flung the pizza into the open oven, and it landed with a satisfying plop inside. Munchy released the board and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his fuzzy arm. "That was close," he whispered to himself. Mia applauded Munchy for his efforts and stated that they needed to leave the pizza in the oven for 10 minutes and then check on it to see if it was ready. Munchy sighed and relaxed. He was proud of himself for making his first ever pizza. But there was no time to rest, as Marcello shuffled back over to the pizza worktop and placed a new order on the board. "One pizza vegetariana and one pizza funghi," Marcello called out, before returning to the front of the shop. Munchy looked at Mia, and she raised her eyebrows and said, "Are you ready to make some more?" Munchy took a deep breath, steadied himself, and replied eagerly, "Let's do this." Munchy and Mia spent the next couple of hours working away in the kitchen as order after order poured in from the phone. Munchy learnt the different types of pizzas that they served and how to make each one. He had a go at frying mozzarella sticks and onion rings, and he boxed up each order, ensuring that everything was there, ready to be picked up by the customers. It was a busy job, and Munchy was learning a lot at once, but he loved it. He was having so much fun. The hours ticked by, and Munchy, Mia and Marcello worked equally as hard as each other. Customers came and went, happily collecting their pizzas, and Munchy even heard one of them declare that the pizza today was the best it had ever been. Munchy smiled to himself as Mia nudged him, whispering, "Did you hear that? You're a natural." After a while, the phone calls died down, and the flow of orders lessened so that the 3 pizza shop workers could relax a little. Munchy wiped his furry brow and sighed with relief. He had never worked so hard in his whole life. Marcello toddled over to the weary raccoon and asked in his flamboyant tone, "Munchy, would you like to have a turn working at the front of the shop? It will be good for you to learn how to serve the customers and answer the phones while it is quiet." Munchy gulped. Working out front was a big responsibility. What if he got something wrong? He felt safe hiding away in the back of the kitchen, but Mia urged him to have a go out front. He needed to learn how to serve the customers eventually. So Munchy pulled off his blue hairnet, dusted off his red apron, and proceeded to join Marcello at the front of the shop. Marcello showed Munchy how to use the cash register and count out change. Then he instructed him to answer the phone the next time it rang. After a few minutes, the shop phone began to ring. Munchy picked up the phone and answered in his brightest, most chirpy voice. "Hello, this is Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia. May I take your order?" he greeted the unknown customer. The voice on the other end paused and then asked with puzzlement, "Munchy, is that you?" Munchy recognized the voice instantly. It was his good friend, Slow Mo the sloth. "Hi, Mo," Munchy replied cheerfully. Mo laughed a slow chuckle. "What are you doing, answering the phone at the pizza shop?" he questioned. Munchy explained that he worked here now. "It's my first day," he added with pride. Slow-Mo was very impressed and delighted that he could order a pizza from his good friend. Mo placed his order with Munchy, and Munchy wrote it down on a piece of paper. Mo wanted an eggplant pizza with extra cheese. Munchy handed the order to Marcello, who was patiently watching and listening in, and the mustachioed frog delivered it to Mia, who was still working in the kitchen. Munchy informed Mo that his pizza would be ready in 20 minutes and prepared to hang up the phone when Mo called out on the other end in his slow drawl, "Munchy, please, can I ask you a favour? At my slow pace, it will take me a long, long time to walk to the shop to collect my pizza. Would it be possible to have it delivered to my house?" Munchy looked to Marcello for advice. He wasn't sure if they offered deliveries. Munchy called out to Marcello and Mia in the kitchen. "Can Mo have his pizza delivered, please?" Marcello replied, "Well, of course he can. We always deliver for Slow Mo." Munchy grinned and told Mo the good news. His sloth friend thanked Munchy for his help and wished him a great rest of his day at work before hanging up the phone to wait for his pizza. Mia whipped up an eggplant pizza with extra cheese pronto and boxed it up for Slow Mo. The delicious scent of freshly melted cheese wafted up out of the box, and Munchy sniffed the air with longing. Slow Mo was lucky to get to eat this pizza soon. Then, to Munchy's surprise, Marcello handed him a helmet, a red and white striped motorbike helmet. "What's this for?" Munchy asked with intrigue. Marcello replied with a smile as he passed Munchy some keys. "It's for you. You are going to deliver Slow-Mo's pizza to him. Take the pizza mobile outside and you'll be there in no time." Munchy looked out the window and noticed the red and white shiny moped parked outside the shop. He clapped his little hands together with glee and strapped the helmet to his head. This was so exciting. Munchy picked up Slow-Mo's pizza and took it outside with him. He placed the pizza box in the delivery bag strapped to the back of the moped and climbed aboard. Turning the key in the ignition, the moped chugged to life with a grumble, and the moped vibrated gently beneath him. He held onto the handlebars, pressed down on the pedal with his foot, and the moped zoomed off into Sleepy Forest, with Munchy and Mo's order on board. Munchy squealed with joy as he rode through the forest to Mo's house. When he had set off for work today, he hadn't thought for a second that he would get an opportunity to deliver pizzas on the pizza mobile. But here he was. This day was turning into the best day ever. Munchy zoomed in and out of the trees, over bridges and through puddles, waving to passers-by as he went. He spotted several of his Sleepy Forest friends as he drove by, and they all cried out with disbelief, "Wow, that's Munchy," as he sped by. Munchy the raccoon felt on top of the world. Eventually, he reached the bottom of the tree where Slow-Mo the sloth lived, and he parked up and hopped off the bike. He unpacked the pizza box from the delivery bag and called up the tree, "Mo, I have your eggplant pizza." A smiley, slovenly face peeped out from behind a tree branch and gushed, "Oh, thank you, Munchy. I can't wait to eat it." Munchy watched as the friendly sloth slowly climbed down the tree to the forest floor and retrieved his pizza. "Thank you again, Munchy," Mo said. "Would you like a slice as a reward for your hard work?" Munchy was tempted, but he shook his head professionally. "No, thank you, Mo," he replied politely. "You enjoy that pizza for yourself. It's best that I get back to the shop to continue helping with the orders. It gets very busy at Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia." Waving goodbye to his friend, Munchy jumped back on the pizza-mobile and raced back through Sleepy Forest to return to the pizza shop. He passed by his friends all over again, and they cheered him on as he zoomed by. "Go, Munchy!" they chanted with encouragement, and Munchy grinned beneath his red and white striped helmet. Pulling up at Mia and Marcello's Pizzatopia once more, Munchy dashed back inside, ready to jump straight back in with the busy orders, but was surprised by what he saw. Mia and Marcello were sitting at the front counter, sharing a large pizza between them. They turned to Munchy and smiled. "Well done, Munchy." Marcello smiled in a surprisingly jovial voice. "You have done a very impressive job today." Mia lifted up the pizza box and offered it towards Munchy, asking, "Would you like a slice?" Munchy gazed at the gooey, cheesy pizza and licked his lips. His tummy grumbled, and he reached out and grabbed a slice. He definitely wanted a slice, maybe even 3. Munchy shoveled the slice of pizza in his mouth and gratefully enjoyed the delicious flavors. This really was one of the best pizza places around. He was proud to work here. Munchy finished his slice and asked, "Are we not making any more orders?" Mia and Marcello giggled and told him to sit down. "Even pizza makers need to have a break every now and then, Munchy," Mia replied, offering him another slice of pizza, which he delightedly took. Munchy smiled and relaxed. He did need a break, actually. It had been a very busy day, and it had been torturous making all these delicious pizzas without getting to eat any of his own. Munchy was relieved to finally sit down, relax with Mia and Marcello, and devour some pizza. Munchy was officially a part of the team. Mia and Marcello had been so impressed with his efforts today, and, most importantly, Munchy was proud of himself. He had learnt a lot of new skills and approached it all with a positive attitude. Plus, riding around on the pizzamobile had been so much fun. As Munchy hung up his apron and set off for home at the end of his shift, Munchy was already looking forward to returning to work tomorrow. As the sun set in the distance, Munchy looked back at the sign above the shop door and thought to himself, Mia, Marcello, and Munchy's Pizzatopia has a good ring to it. Then he set off home, skipping all the way with a box of moon cheese in his little raccoon hands. Now we are sailing into a soft and peaceful sleep. Feel the soft and cozy support of your bed. Feel the way your body, heavy and happy with sleepiness, is being carried upon it. It is as though you are being carried on gentle ocean currents, on the rising and falling of waves. Feel how they are lapping gently beneath you, bearing you into the land of sleep. These waves carrying you are deep and gentle like our breath. Breathe with the waves. Breathe in and out. In and out they go. In and out. In and out. Close your eyes. Let your eyelids be heavy. Let your whole body relax as you sail into sleep. Feel your arms soft and heavy, and your legs and feet soft and heavy too. Let's pay some gentle attention to how our bodies are feeling. Keep your eyes closed and let your mind come unhooked from your head. Your mind is a magical thing. It can stay inside your head, or it can travel all around your body, like a little person wandering around a house to check that all is well. Let your mind travel first to your breath. Feel the breath moving through your nose. Feel the breath moving into your chest or into your tummy, making it rise and fall, rise and fall. Good. Just focus on your breathing. That's wonderful. Now let your mind float down from your breath. Let it travel down one of your arms. Feel the sensation in your arm. Feel how it is heavy on the bed, or maybe soft, tucked underneath your head as you sleep. Let your mind travel down your fingers. First, let your mind wander down to the tip of your thumb. Now down your first finger. Now your middle finger. Now your ring finger. And last but not least, your pinky. What does it feel like at the end of your pinky? Bring your mind back up to your breathing and breathe in and out. Breathe in and out. Now we're traveling with our minds all the way down our other arm. Let your mind go down each of your fingers on that arm. First, let your mind wander down to the tip of your thumb. Now down your first finger. Now your middle finger. Now your ring finger. And now your pinky. Very good. Now let your mind come back to your chest and let it sit there, soft and heavy, right where your heart is. If you let your mind rest there, you will even be able to feel the gentle beating of your heart. Do you know what your heart says as it's beating? It says, I love, I love, I love. That's what everyone's heartbeat says. I love, I love, I love. And as everyone's heartbeat says that, the world fills up with love. The world fills up with each heartbeat like a lake, filling up with the raindrops that fall from the sky. The lake of love can never be too full, and it can never be empty. The whole world is full of love. You are loved. Your family love you. Your friends love you. People all across the world love you. The animals in the fields and the birds in the trees, and even the trees themselves, they all love you too. And we love them back. That is the beautiful thing about love. You can never give too much of it, because it can never run out. Love is like the water in the lake. There will always be more of it. It falls from the sky like rain and keeps us safe and happy. You are safe. You are happy. You are loved. While you're floating through your dreams, whisper your love to the world. Say, I love you, world. And now, listen out. Hear the world say it back. The world is saying, I love you. The world is gentle, and you are gentle too. The world is kind, and you are kind too. The world is loved, and you are loved too. The rain loves the ground it falls upon, and the ground loves the grass and trees and flowers that grow up out of it. And the grass loves the animals that walk upon it. And so the animals love the world they wander through, because it is so beautiful, and the whole world loves you. Feel how your body is drifting peacefully upon the gentle lake. Let any worries that may have lingered from the day sail away from your mind. Watch them disappear like a whole host of multicoloured helium balloons being released into the sky. Watch them as they go, as they soar up high. Smaller and smaller they get, smaller and smaller, until they are just little specks in the sky. And then they are gone. You are safe. You are kind. There is nothing to worry about as you drift into sleep, because you are drifting on the lake of love. You are safe. You are happy. You are loved. The world is gentle and you are gentle too. The world is kind and you are kind too. The world is loved and you are loved too. Close your eyes. Let your eyelids get heavy. Let your limbs get heavy too. Feel your arms and legs falling heavily into your soft and cozy bed. Feel your chest rising and falling with your breathing. Rising and falling like the waves on the lake of love. Sleep, little one. You are safe. You are happy. You are loved. There is more love in this world than there are stars in the sky. There is more kindness in this world than there are droplets of water in the entire lake. The world is gentle, and you are gentle too. The world is kind, and you are kind too. The world is loved, and you are loved too. Good night, little one. Sleep tight.